This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Nweke Adeleru Balogun. Our headline story: boosting Africa's revenue, the remittance and taxation conversation. COVID-19 and debt has humbled many African nations. An earlier debate of taxing African nationals in the diaspora is back. Is this wishful thinking or a viable option? This is our focus today on the show. We'll also touch base with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on with NC4 to watch. We have stories from Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa. You'll want to know what exactly we're keeping our eyes on. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, taxes are legal requirements in many countries, and they are major parts of the revenue stream for many nations and governments. But the tax system has been flawed in a number of these countries where emphasis has been on taxing the middle class rather than equitably taxing everyone. Now, a debate on taxing diaspora workers by their home country is becoming a hot topic. This due now more than ever to reduced earnings caused by COVID-19 pandemic and its associated economic downturn. Remittances to Africa over the years have been impressive, and this has encouraged the movement that is looking to tax diaspora workers. However, the resilience and commitments of the diaspora could not overcome the menace of the novel coronavirus. Remittances to Africa declined by 9% in 2020 and are projected to fall further by 6% in 2021. By these estimates, total remittances to sub-Saharan Africa this year are expected to be around $44 billion, down from $48 billion last year. For example, in Nigeria, according to Section 2 of the Personal Income Tax Act, a person resident outside Nigeria is only taxed on the income or profit derived from Nigeria. Although Section 3, subsection 1 provides that the subject to the provisions of this Act, tax shall be payable for each year of assessment on the aggregate amount, each of which is the income of every taxable person for the year, from a source inside or outside Nigeria. This is only applicable to residents of the country. Now, it therefore means that non-resident Nigerians are not subject to income taxes under the Act, except such income is derived from Nigeria and where such is not within the 180-day rule of residency in cases of foreign employment. Just for us to understand, remittance is the transfer of money, often by a foreign worker, to an individual or individuals in their home country. Money sent home by immigrants competes with international aid as one of the largest financial inflows to developing countries. Now, joining me on Business Edge is Global Affairs Analyst Nweke. He is a Nigerian-born politician who is a Belgian politician and member of the Green Party. He was sworn in for a third term of office in January 2019 as Councillor for Social Affairs in Ostend City Council in West Flanders Province. Collins, thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge. All right, let's get straight into it. It seems that governments, and not only governments, but some people on different sides of finance are finally putting their eyes on remittances and diaspora taxing. Remittance is usually done quite willingly, but do you know of any place where there is literally an obligation in terms of taxation to pay taxes to a country of origin by Africans in diaspora?
I'm not aware of any automatic taxation obligation anywhere in the world. Taxation issues, as they relate to people in diaspora and their country of origin, is usually a subject of regulations which have to be negotiated between the host country and the country of origin. And, it requires very, very delicate, negotiation, and often taking a very long period, because there are lots of legal restrictions that have to be surmounted. So no, it's not automatic, but it can be negotiated.
So I like the fact you've brought up the legal restrictions and the conversation around negotiation, because that's one of the things that has really might be a very big obstacle in this regard, which is also the issue of double taxation. Those who are Africans resident in countries outside of the continent paying taxes in those countries and then being taxed somehow back in their home countries. Do you think it's in any way feasible for African nations to reach an agreement, a consensus with host nations in order for those of their countrymen who are in diaspora to somehow be taxed? Would we say, maybe let's use the United States for an example. So could we come to an agreement with the US for every $1,000 that is paid as tax, $900 goes to the US government and maybe $100 goes to the home country? How feasible is this actually?
Well, feasibility and possibility are two different things. Yes,
true.
In principle, it is perfectly possible. However, it requires, it's so very complicated. I will give you an example. In the United States, for example, you do have the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, which makes it possible for United States citizens, residents abroad, to be able to pay taxes to the United States.
Yes.
But you see, this is an act that took very, very many years, I believe up to 20 years, to get running. And so I think the question that Nigeria should ask itself is it worth the trouble? That's number one. And then number two, is it a low-hanging fruit that you can plug immediately and begin to improve the revenue stream of Nigeria? Those are the critical questions. But by the time you answer them, you'll be able to make up your mind whether it is something you should pursue now or pursue other avenues of cash generation through the diaspora.
Okay, so low-hanging fruit, is it actually worth the efforts? I think those are interesting points to make. Using Nigeria once again as an example, there is a law, an act that exists here in the country for personal income tax deduction, but it's for income that is earned from Nigeria or related to Nigeria. So all of those whose earnings are not linked to Nigeria are not taxed. Is that right? Who's eligible to be taxed really in relations to this?
Yeah, let me put it this way. I believe that within the existing law, around 182, time frame, but also the fact that Nigerians in diaspora are having quite a lot to do with Nigeria in terms of remittances and so on and so forth. I believe that, the more reasonable thing for Nigeria to do is to pursue the avenue of remittances, but not for consumption purposes, but more for investment, facilitate all sorts of incentives that will make Nigerians invest more in Nigeria. And so those earnings in Nigeria will then be eligible for taxation under existing laws. I see that as a low-hanging fruit, which could be consummated as quickly as possible. And then, of course, I'm not ruling out ultimately diaspora taxation, but it is not something that can happen immediately, and I think it's a whole waste of time. Just to give you an example, Diaspora Commission, which is meant to regulate the relationship between Nigeria and its diaspora, took 20 years to actually consummate. And even at that, nearly 2 years after Diaspora Commission came to existence, they have not even managed to constitute its board fully. So yes, a Diaspora Commission exists in name, but it doesn't quite exist in legal terms because the board is not constituted. So you will have the same thing with other efforts around diaspora taxation.
Okay, interesting enough, I like how this conversation is shaping up, because you're not completely shelving the idea, but you're saying that look at those who have tried it. It took the US about 20-something years to get it together. Is it a low-hanging fruit? Can it be something that is immediately easy to get on board? And truly, at the end of the day, is it worth it? So now the focus back on the issue of remittances. And we've seen that globally across the world that remittances will decline 20%. This is according to the World Bank and and in a report called COVID-19 Crisis Through Migration Lens, predicted that remittance flows will decline by 20% globally as the coronavirus renders swaths of people unemployed across the world. So I want you to expand a little bit more about the comment you made on how governments, not just Nigeria now, African governments can look to bringing in more remittance and doing more detailed and specific work with it, rather than just saying they want to tax Africans in diaspora, or they're just happy to be bringing in the money.
Yeah, indeed, a very beautiful question, Tolu. Like I mentioned earlier on, there are other instruments than taxation to be able to take full advantage of the goodies that the diaspora bring to the table. Now, I believe that if some incentives are promoted, take for example, Nigeria did run what they call the Diaspora Bond at some point.
Yes.
That is a powerful instrument. I mean, there are also talks about diaspora investment funds that could be instituted to trigger investment coming in from the diaspora to Nigeria, whereby the diaspora investor, make it scale, and then the Nigerian government also earns revenue from that. These are more feasible areas to look at. And if I have the latitude, let me just refer to the Diaspora Bond, for example. I mean, it was oversubscribed.
Yes.
I mean, very, very soon after it was launched, it got oversubscribed. So that is to tell you, indeed, that it is something that they can cash into, just to leave it at that example.
Okay, so I like the fact that you mentioned bonds and the fact that they were oversubscribed, the diaspora bonds in particular. Focus is there. Do you think that we're not doing enough in order to put out bonds for the diaspora? I know Ethiopia has worked to open up its economy, one of probably the last closed economy on the continent, and we're seeing moves economically in order to get Ethiopians in diaspora to invest in the country. You have other countries on the other side like Eritrea that are working on a 2% diaspora tax. Which one in the long run do you think is going to work? A focus on a long-term diaspora tax, or us using a number of smaller instruments, as you've called them, lower-hanging fruits that can quickly give us the yields we want, combining them together sort of as a plate and an offering, rather than a focus on maybe one long-term goal?
The difference in terms of what delivers, immediate benefits or short-term benefit for Nigeria is indeed to pursue those incentives, those instruments. For example, the diaspora bond. I like to say that the issues around diaspora taxation is so very complicated that if they get it started now, it might even take another 30 years to reach some treaties, because it requires the treaties with different countries of the world. Take, for example, I live in a country where there is no tax arrangements between them and Nigeria. So to put that in place, it requires intricate, negotiation. Now, Nigeria, for example, actually needs to concentrate on the most important thing. What about diaspora database? You want to tax people, you don't even know who lives where, what is their number, who does what, and so on and so forth. Those are areas that they should concentrate on and then walk it through the year. But yes, indeed, some other instruments, investment instruments, rather than consumption instruments, will serve Nigeria better.
Okay, so I just quickly want to note, while I did mention Eritrea and the 2% diaspora tax, there are a lot of reactions on that, and the United Nations Security Council actually called out Eritrea for using extortion, threats of violence, fraud, and illicit means to collect taxes outside of Eritrea from its nationals or other individuals of Eritrean descent. So even though they're putting that into place, it's getting a lot of criticism, and we're not sure how long that's going to hold. So let's still talk about taxes a bit more. Now, tax revenue accounts for over a third of the GDP in OECD countries, but they account for far less in developing countries like the majority of those on the continent, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where they correspond to less than a fifth of the GDP. Tax to GDP ratios in Africa range from 6.3% in Equatorial Guinea and Nigeria to 32.4% in the Seychelles, with 21 countries having ratios between 10% and 25%. The tax to GDP ratio exceeded 25% in 4 countries: Morocco, Seychelles, South Africa, and Tunisia, and was less than 10% in 5 countries: Chad, the Republic of the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Nigeria. So obviously the continent needs to do better on the issue of taxation. We have issues with making sure those at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum are taxed equitably. We have issues with bringing in the informal sector to making sure whatever amount of tax, but they're also part of the tax net. What do you think can be done for the continent to achieve a better, more equitable tax net and tax ranking, and also to spread out the burden and make sure that we're bringing in as much tax as we should be in a legal and fair manner?
Absolutely. You see, when I place emphasis on negotiations and signing of international treaties and all of that, and following the books in terms of international treaties that Nigeria is a signatory to, those are exactly what I meant, because obviously Eritrea didn't do that. That's number one. Number two, we know that Eritrea actually didn't consult with the diaspora and carry them along. I mean, just like we're having a conversation now where a number of issues are coming up. So as long as Nigeria doesn't see diaspora taxation as a cash and carry operation, where you begin the conversation today and then tomorrow, you bribe the legislators into enacting a law, as long as they don't do that, I believe that, we can build it up, listen to both sides, and let's not forget, some of the diaspora that we are talking about are very well connected, powerful individuals in the different countries where they are, and they exercise a whole lot of influences. So you can't get the diaspora taxation going if you do not secure
the buy-in
of the host country.
Very true.
I think what Nigeria has to do, go straight to the question you asked, what Africa needs to do is to increase the tax base rather than taxing people more. Take, for example, Nigeria as a specific example. It is known that only 15% of individuals that are taxed, and these are mostly hardworking middle-class people whose taxes are deducted before their income gets into their account.
From source.
So what people are essentially saying is tax them more. No, you can't kill them because their situation made it so that you can tax them. What you need to do is the small and medium-sized enterprises build very powerful structures, and they are easy to build, whereby you capture them in the tax system. That way, you are expanding the tax base, and even if it's 1 naira that you are taxing each and every one of them, if there are 20 million of them in 1 month, you are getting 20 million. So these are very little things that they should begin to do.
Okay. Collins Nweke, thank you so much. Time is never on our side, but we're getting into conversations that many African governments are looking at. And I think there's a very valid point you make in making sure that all of those who need to be party and parcel of the conversations are brought to the table. It's not just government coming down with policies and laws that don't take into consideration or cognizance the needs of the people, and of course those who might end up bearing the burden. Global Affairs Analyst Collins Nweke, thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me, Torque.
All right. So I want to leave you with this. It is said that the biggest hole in public coffers in Africa is not money squandered or stolen, but that which is never collected in the first place. More tax revenue would not only help the governments of these countries function and pay for goods and services, but would open the way for other markets and state reforms that would promote economic, social, and environmental development. The tax conversation definitely continues. Now we move on to NC4 to watch, and our first one takes place in West Africa, where Nigeria's tax agency agency. Look at that. The Federal Inland Revenue Service has created 35 additional tax audit units across the country. This is aimed at addressing illicit financial flow, according to Abdullahi Ahmad, Director, Communications and Liaison Department of the service. The agency added that between 2007 and 2017, Nigeria was reported to have lost over 5.4 trillion naira, about $178 billion, through tax evasion by multinationals doing business in the country. From east to west, the Kenya Revenue Authority has unveiled a voluntary tax disclosure program that seeks to waive penalties accrued for individuals who failed to disclose any tax that was due over the last 5 years, as long as they pay the principal amount this year. The National Treasury, through the Finance Act 2020, introduced the voluntary tax disclosure program, offering affected taxpayers relief on penalties and interest on any tax liability disclosed in respect to the 5 years running to June 2020. Business Edge is telling you taxes are a big conversation. Stay with us for all the latest on that. Now to Tanzania. In a bid to hasten up recovery from the impact of COVID-19, the country has set up a national convention bureau to promote conference tourism as a way of speeding up the industry's recovery. The permanent secretary in the Ministry of Tourism recently said that the country's diplomatic offices in various countries around the world will be used to appeal for more international conferences to be held in the country. And finally, foreign investors have turned sour on bonds, with the latest data showing they've effectively dumped all their holdings of South Africa's fixed income assets acquired in the final quarter of 2020, as surging COVID-19 cases across the globe stoke renewed fears about world economic growth prospects. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange data shows that foreign investors have already sold almost 6 billion rand in SA bonds on a net basis so far in 2021, almost entirely reversing the 6.1 billion rand net purchases they made in the final quarter of 2020. And that's it on this edition of Businesses. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Follow us on social media. We are at New Central TV. Head to our website and download our mobile app on Play Store and iOS. Till next time, I'm Tolu Nweke Adeleru Balogun.